coming. Appreciate it. I'm Robert Wolk. I'm the president of the St. Genevieve Museum. We appreciate you being here. We're very anxious to hear your presentation. So, for anybody that is a member, you already know this, you get in free with membership. So if you got a pass and membership, you get in free. If you do not have a membership, you can buy a membership down in the gift shop, and the entry fee for this can be applied towards that membership fee. We'll take it off. So this presentation is being brought to you by Joe and Mary Claire Roger at the mattress store. And what a better presentation to have for the Rogers. Who can fit into this better than the Rogers? You know? So they're going to be on this. And then I also passed out to everybody, or Ed did for us, this brochure. This is our next speaker series, and it's coming up next Wednesday. And naturally, again, the Roger family is involved. That's going to be about organisms and how they shake our planet through time. And Lori Ebling is presenting that. So we really appreciate the Roger family being here with us. Becky Millinger has researched her family history for over 30 years, beginning at a time when the hobby was relatively new. She has had a lifelong passion for genealogy and improving her knowledge about good genealogic standards, practice, and credible research. She exhaustively researched the life and family tree of silversmith Antoine O'Neill as chairman to restore his historic house on Main Street. After many years of trying to break a brick wall to find information about her great-grandfather, she successfully used Y-DNA to identify her family. Are you going to ask everybody for a DNA test?
Only if you pay for it.
Okay. So thank you for being with us.
You're very welcome.
We look forward to it.
Good, you're very welcome. Well, I did the little poll. Maybe I'll do it again because you weren't all here, but is there anybody here, I asked, who was a beginner genealogist, has never researched their tree? And if you haven't, then I have a lot of information for you. If you're an intermediate person, you have done some, I may still have some information. And if you're an expert, I probably will still have some information for Bob Mueller. So we're going to get started, and I'll tell you, kind of to mirror what Bob said, what Robert said, I started my quest into genealogy with a family question. My great-grandfather, there was a folklore on my dad's side that he was orphaned at 9 days old, and he may have lived with an uncle, but nobody knew a lot of information. So right from that part, even back then, I had enough sense to say, who carried that story forward for him if he was 9 months when they died, or 9 days when they died. And so nobody could answer that. So that really piqued my interest. I wanted to know more about that. So I began doing a little bit of my own research to read how to do genealogy, because I had no idea. And it was a very new art back in the late 1980s. There wasn't very much out there. There was a magazine that I subscribed to called Family Tree magazine, and it would have articles. So I read that and I learned a little bit about it. And then I remember that one of the first articles about getting started said, where to begin? Start with yourself. And I thought, well, that's dumb. I know all about myself. And so 30 some years later, I realized it isn't dumb. The way to do your genealogy is to start with yourself. So most people come into it with a goal. I want to find out about my great-grandfather. That's been my goal. But I had other goals. I had some goals about my mom's people. You may want to know who your 2 times great-grandmother's parents were so you can find her maiden name. You might have the lofty goal of saying, I'm going to research my whole family in a couple of years and put it on paper. And I will say, good luck with that. And a lot of people that I talk to say, I don't know anything about my family. No one has ever really talked about it. Sometimes my ancestors, my grandmother or my great-grandmother wouldn't talk about it. Well, I don't know about why they don't, but they don't, and that's a pretty common problem. So where do you start? You start with yourself. How many of you have actually looked at your real birth certificate? And all of you are old enough that your birth certificate is a lot different than the ones that are being sent out today. But they have a number of clues in them for people who want to know more about them. You may know all about yourself, but your birth certificate might have some surprises in it. Ed's aunt was talking to me one time, and she said her birth certificate had her name wrong, and the doctor, whoever, she didn't know who wrote it, of course, she's a baby, but somebody had written her name wrong. And it was not the name they called her by, nor was it the name her mother called her. So she doesn't know how that happened. She didn't know. But usually my birth certificate, for instance, says that I was born at home, that I wasn't in a hospital. You may have been born in a hospital. What city were you born in? Is the city that you grew up in? Because if it's not, there's a story there. There's a clue there for you to start looking for. So we start collecting information. If you haven't looked at your birth certificate and you can get the original one, probably the reprints that they have right now are not very helpful because they're transcribed, which I'm against using those if you can get the original. But start writing your own history down. All of you are older enough that there are children and grandchildren in your lives who might be very interested in your story and what you have to say. Where did you go to school? When you were a child, were you baptized and confirmed in a church? Just that kind of information, because you may not be interested in that yourself, but I'm going to guarantee you, just like me, I'm interested in what I wish my grandparents would have written down. And one of my grandmothers was very much a historian, but sometimes she wrote things that didn't pan out to be true. So one thing that you can do, if you have grandparents and parents that are still alive, sit down with them and ask them questions. Don't grill them like you're a detective with them under lights, but you can say to them, tell me what life was like when you were growing up. And I was telling Stephanie Millinger when we were talking about doing this talk, for me, for this 30 years, which have gone by so fast, it's almost equivalent to how my grandparents, my grandfather, my dad's grandfather was born in 1903. So he was at a time where he was aware of going places in a buggy and a wagon, and suddenly there's a car. And I can envision that he was out in the field one day and a plane went over, and he's shocked because it's not something he ever saw before. I think the first plane was 1910, so he would have been a child. But so our own lives have that kind of, oh wow, minutes, especially in genealogy and record research and AI, if you know what that is, artificial intelligence is becoming everywhere in the things that we deal with. So start writing your history so that your children and your grandchildren can see how it was when you grew up. If you grew up on a farm, which I did, I always tell my daughter stories about growing up on the farm and the things we did. And I hated when my parents said, I walked up 2 hills to go to school, one up and one up coming back, which, a big joke. But, they were very closeted about other things they wouldn't tell me. Family lore, that little story I told you about my great-grandfather being orphaned at age 9. Well, that was according to the Gospel of Grandma. And the Gospel of Grandma is often wrong. And it's okay if you put those stories in your tree. There's a place in the tree for comments. Do that. Write down, this is what my mother or my grandmother told me. However, these are the records that I found that disprove that. And I know that that didn't happen. And that's immaterial. But so the Gospel of Grandma can be wrong. As you look at documents, make notes of what they say. Note the names that are in them, because usually people who have a contract for land, for instance, their family members might be their relatives. They also might be the people who witness that deed. And if you're not familiar with that name, then find out who they are, research it. And that's something that I have learned. I don't know, Bob can probably tell you similar stories with me. I should have called this talk mistakes I've made in 33 years, because I've made a lot of them. And Bob's laughing because he gets it. Don't get hung up on spellings of names. If you have somebody in your life who is, your grandpa was a Paul Schaefer or something, just to pull a name out of the air, don't get hung up on how you find records that have Schaefer written in them, because while he may have written his name a certain way, not all of his relatives did. So you never discount, especially if that person lives in the same town or they go to the same church, they're probably related. But that's your job to try to find out. So then read and analyze those records. That's probably the hardest part of this, and that's one of the largest mistakes that I made early on. Was I was a collector of records. I would go places and I'd make copies of their deed, and there would be a copy of this and that, and I had those and I put them in a binder, because back when I started everything was on paper. There was no digitized records, and I failed majorly to sit down, and I would glance through them or I'd speed read through them, but I didn't analyze them. I didn't read them for who they included in names and what they said. And so that was a big mistake. And if you're starting out, that's one of the smartest things that you can do. Write down any questions that come from you looking at documents like that. Why was my grandfather in Dent County when we're here? I grew up in Jefferson County. That's a clue that you need to look for. Try to organize, but you're not doing your research the way I did. I don't know what Bob has at his house, but I have like at least 5 binders that are 5-inch that are full of papers from when I first started. And learn to organize those, because as you learn more about your family, you might have a paper that you look at, you read, and you say, well, I don't know who this guy is. And then maybe as you're doing genealogy a year or two later, you realize who that is because of another document, because it's your relative. So that's always a good hint, is just to organize from the beginning. Create a research plan. And I thought about this as I wrote this because it sounds so big. It sounds like what your college professor told you to do to get a better grade. It doesn't have to be even that extreme. You can, as you're looking at notes, I have on my computer, I actually have a Word document, but when I go places, if I go to the library here or if I go down to the courthouse, I take a pad of paper, and any questions that come up, I write them down. I need to look for this. I didn't find it here. Where can I find it? That is a research plan right there. Just look for something later. You don't want to get off track on it. And then the experts say research one name at a time. I haven't done that. I have focused on my great-grandfather. And I'll tell you the sad thing about my great-grandfather. His name was James Alexander Williams. You want to bet? Oh, I'm sorry. Close your ears. Bob hates the Williams word. But you want to make a guess who his parents were? John and Mary Williams. Do you know how many John and Mary Williamses there are? More than I can count. So when you keep a research log and you look for things and you have a research plan, it kind of keeps you directed, because you can get off in rabbit holes and you can just go down those holes for a long time. Tracking your progress, if you have that research plan, that can be the tracking. As you find something, okay, I'm going to the library here and I'm going to look for this. Check it off your list. You're done with that. You don't have to go back to it. A log can prevent you from, if you're looking online, I can't tell you the number of times I've found a record online, didn't write down where I looked at it, and then I go back because I'm still looking for information, and I go, well, this really looks familiar. Yeah, because you read it like 6 times. So just be in the habit of those kinds of things. It will help you immensely. So what do you do after you get all those records? Well, you build a tree, and you can do that very easily. I did it on paper, and I actually gave you some links for things that I use, and they didn't come through as they did on my sheet on blue. Some of these Bob Mueller actually gave me. But there is, if you want to do paper research, there is a magazine, the Family Tree magazine has an online site, and they give you free forms. You can just go on and download them and then print them out. I use those sometimes if I go to a library where I don't want to take my computer, but I want to write things down. I'll use those. And so how do you build a tree? Well, there are many platforms. You can buy software that you can upload from the computers online and put it in your computer as a private tree. Nobody can ever get in that. Or you can go to Ancestry.com, you can go to FamilySearch.org, you can go to MyHeritage. All of those allow you, Genealogy is another one, they allow you to create a family tree. And so that's when you start with yourself too, by the way, because I'll get into this later about DNA. If you do a DNA test and you have a tree that starts with your grandma, that you were looking for that information, it's not going to link it to you. It's going to link it when you put your name and your information is. So I made kind of a pseudo tree so that you can look if you're not familiar with Ancestry. And let me just say, preface this, Ancestry.com, MyHeritage, I think Genealogy, they cost a membership fee. And you can make a tree without buying that membership, but you cannot look at their records without it. However, you can go to the library. Any library has an Ancestry version that's free that you can check and you can download. If you find something of your family there, download it, have it and put it in your tree as if you had that record, because once you stop that membership, it will go away. They don't give you that without you taking it, and they don't care if you take it. But so this page shows you a little bit about what you would look for. I don't have a pointer, but you can see up under where it says the last column says notes and comments. That's where I make my notes, on the very end at the top in the brown. That's where I go in and I say, my mother told me this story about Grandma, and I put it in her tree, Grandma so-and-so, and she told me this, this, and this. I state what facts were, and then I say, and I found in the records that this isn't true, and here's what I found. Because then that helps anybody else that my mother told in our family her little cute story, which was a very hallmark story about one of my great-grandfathers, but it was not true. All of it. Some of it was. It was basis that it was true. And so I use that a lot. I do comments. You can go in and play around with these when you set a tree, but basically you go in, you put your birth date, you put where you were born, and then you're living, because you would have to be, or you wouldn't be filling this out, and then you start adding to it. You can add that birth certificate that I suggested that you look at. Take a screenshot, upload it, and put it near this, and it will come and you'll see it on the birth, where it says birth. You'll have an image there that shows you there's a document that goes with that. And then just start adding to it. Add your marriage license and your marriage certificate, which are different things. If you know your parents' information, their vital records, you can add that. Vital records meaning their birth date if they're alive, and if they're dead, then their death date. And you go in and start filling that out. As you do that on Ancestry, and I don't do my heritage very much because I don't use that for my tree. I use my heritage for DNA. But where it says gallery up there, that's where you upload things in, and then the next thing is hints. So when you put this information in, within a few days, you're going to start getting little green things, like on that hint will green out, there'll be a 1 or something where it'll say, there are these hints that we think we found your ancestor. Please be careful not to copy that stuff without verifying it, because Ancestry, MyHeritage, all of those sites have no oversight by their companies to know that what you put in there is true. And so there are so many fantasies that people have about their family, and if you look, there's a way to see. If you look at how somebody has filled in George Doe, not so much because you know your family, but as you go back, there might be 10 trees that have all the same information, not a single source document, and none of it is true because they found it somewhere else or and so don't rely on those. Please, from the get-go, get really good about not relying on that. So that's basically how you build your tree. And then you can go in if you want to pay, and I have been an Ancestry member for a long time. It kind of irks me from the beginning whenever I had to pay, but it's worth it. It really is worth it if you're a genealogist and you want to know stuff. But when I go into it, I can find those records now. I can download them, and I still download them even though I have a membership. And then I put them in my tree. I source where I got them. I source where I found them. And I try to make that as clean as I can so that if somebody who looks at my tree can say, well, you say that your great-grandfather lived in St. Louis and he died in 1990 or 1890. How do you know that? Oh, I don't have a source there, so I can't say, well, I know because I read it on Ancestry, because that doesn't work for people who are really looking for clarity in a family tree. So what kind of records would you look for? Whenever you start your tree and you go search for Ancestry, there's actually a list of things that come up, and they are census records, vital records, and vital means birth date, death date, marriage date. Some divorce records are on there, land deeds, mortgages, a land warranty, and I've given you various links here to find like land warranty. Those are held by the government. There's a site called GLOW, and it's the Bureau of Land Management, and so any record that would be available for somebody who got a land warrant for, say, military service, or they might have gotten a Homestead Act land warrant. That's where you go to look for those things. Some of those are on Ancestry, but not as much. Military records, there is actually a separate, I know Gary Schell has Fold 3, which is a site that deals pretty much largely with military records. It has a lot, but it doesn't have as much as the National Archives, which you would find more records in the archives. But draft service discharge records for it's Civil War, World War I, and World War II. There are some of the older wars, but they're not as readily found. Pension records, if your ancestor died while they were in service to their country, there will be a pension record where they paid money to the widow. Probate records, last will and testaments, all of these records are really good for you to look at to get the details about your life, or as my daughter says, the deets.
One locally here is the Civil War reenactment group. And because I had a great-grandfather was in there, I'm from the South.
Yeah.
And he came up this way, and they have records
right.
in about 3 minutes.
I think Grimminger, what's his name? Tom Grimminger has done a lot of genealogical, and Gary Schell does. If you're not already a member of the St. Genevieve Genealogical Group online on Facebook, that's a group that's free. You can join it. You have to ask to become a member of it. It doesn't cost anything. But Gary posts all of those Civil War people that he does records for. So yeah, those, you know, there are so many. What I gave you is a tip of an iceberg of what's available out there. You have to get good at looking for things, and especially if it's your interest to look at, you know, Civil War, for instance. Last will and testaments, those are on Ancestry. A lot of, and I didn't put this down, but my favorite site, I'll talk about that in a little bit. My favorite site is the FamilySearch.org. If you're not familiar with that, it's the site of the Latter-day Saints, the Mormon Church. They have been in the genealogy business since 1894 when they started their society out in Utah. And I think it was in 1932 or 36 where they had an effort where they were going to go worldwide and microfilm records from churches and civil facilities and that kind of thing. And I've been out there twice. If you've never been, you ought to go just for the experience of 5 floors of records. It's a genealogist's dream. And you are overwhelmed by all of the things that are there. But when I was out there the last time, I think it was in 2015, they announced that in 10 years they would have all their records online, and they have met that goal. When they say all their records, they don't have all their records. If they have copy-free books, for instance, those things are not online. But for the most part, the records you're looking for are free. All you have to do is create a free account, and then you can go in and look at them, and you can download them, you can print them out, you can build your tree there. But what I don't like about that, and I might be speaking out of turn because I don't know totally, but I know that if you make a family tree there, that I think people have the ability to go in and change that, and I don't like that. I don't want anybody messing with my tree. So civil records, you can go to civil court records, and Family Search has all of these things I've mentioned for land disputes, lawsuits, debt suits where somebody sues somebody because they owe them. I found a lot of divorce records on civil circuit court records. Church, if you are Catholic, you're back pretty far with Catholic records. They're great. They have baptism, they have confirmation, they have marriage, they have burials. I have memberships on there for people who are Protestant, which I am, which just trips you up because for the most part they didn't keep any kind of records like that. They didn't necessarily baptize children. However, you can find sometimes their meeting minutes, and within those they might have a membership list of everybody that's in that church. I've actually found one of my relatives was excommunicated for bad behavior in a Protestant church. So there's an awful lot to be found there. Tax records are my favorite. I should have put this at the top, but I saved it toward the end because you might not understand why without me going through all these others first. But census records, if you are familiar with census, they're taken every 10 years. They were taken from the beginning when we became a country, starting in 1790. And then every 10 years there's been a census taken. And generally those first censuses were population studies. They wanted to see who was in the country, what do they have, where do they live, what do they own, kind of thing. But tax records are not every 10 years, they're every year. You pay taxes every year. And so as you go back in history in the 1800s and 1700s, sometimes that's the only record you can find of your person. And if you, I have been listening to a lot of webinars from people who are a lot smarter than me and a lot more experienced than I am, but they will tell you how you can do studies of tax lists where you, I have my people that Bob doesn't like me to name, they were in Charlotte County and Pennsylvania County, Virginia, and I can look at those records, and I've done land. You have to send for those to come to you, but I've done land and then poll tax, where a poll tax is, it's various reasons why you might have a poll tax. It might be a church tax to pay for people that are indigent to have money. It also can be for you to vote, but most of the time it's just a tax to pay for the expenses of that county. And those, if you look at them and do a study of the whole thing, like if it's 1782, look at everybody on there, because if you're a person who his name started with W died and he owed a tax, there might be somebody who administered that estate whose name was George Evans, and so his name will be under the E's, and you'll miss it because it won't be in the W's. And so that's a really good tip, is to do the whole thing. I listen to, if you're interested in learning a lot more, there are several online places that you can go, but I've been a member of Family Tree DNA webinars, which is wonderful. It's $50 a year. They have over, I was just listening to somebody today, and they were talking about the numbers of webinars that they have in every subject you can think of. And there's one woman there, if you want to go in, and some of them it costs. It's a pay-for site, but they do have free things. But Elizabeth Schoen Mills is this person that I follow, and she tells you how to find your ancestor, your female ancestor in 1850, who doesn't show up in any record. Women did not have much of a voice in records back in the 1800s, and so she shows you how to dig for those records, and so she's the one who has done this wonderful tax seminars. There are some other ones too. So if you haven't looked at tax records, you can see sometimes the tax enumerator. There are several ways that they took taxes, but they might send a summons to you that you come down to Murphy's Tavern on the 16th of the month to pay your taxes. And then you'll see on that date the different people that come, and a lot of them have your same surname. So they may be relatives, they don't have to be, but it's your job to try to find out. So they're very valuable records. Newspapers, I don't know, Bob, if you found this happening, but obituaries are wonderful sources for genealogical information, but we are in a trend right now where people aren't buying them. They're not paying for an obituary, and that started about 3 years ago from what I can see. However, you do sometimes see that obituary information on their memorial at Find a Grave. Again, with Find a Grave, be careful, because that information is just polluted with stuff that people want to believe is true, but there's no source for it. I have my W guy there. I have that problem. And how do you fight that? You do genealogy and you figure it out for yourself. That's why I tell you not to copy records, because if they have something that you know can't be true, you have to find the record to prove that what you have is right. And sometimes if you have disputes about stuff like that, maybe your information is wrong. You have to be able to say, no, I have a record that proves this. Cemetery records, this is kind of getting a little bit passe, because Find a Grave, billions of graves. There's another one, I can't think of it, it's million graves or something like that. But somebody back, I think that this guy, I don't have all the dates and details, but there was a man who decided he wanted to start keeping track of people, celebrities who had died and where they were buried. So he developed this web page, and it was called Find a Grave, and he started putting like Elvis and different people, and then he opened it up to the public so that you could go into Valley Spring and you could take a shot of every person, you could bring their information up. Unfortunately, that has been polluted, as well. But it's interesting to see, sometimes you'll find a gravestone of your relative who has a date that's different than you have information for. That happens a lot. Same on death certificates. When somebody passes away, their family's in distress, and the wife may say, oh, his name was Frank George instead of Frank Jean, I don't know, but that's why you have to look at your own records and try very hard to make sure your information is correct. I've been to church cemeteries where there's a sexton office and they have all of the original plots that were sold. And they'll tell you who should have been buried there and maybe wasn't, and who is buried there and shouldn't have been. They didn't actually pay for it. But as those things get turned over, if the person who bought it dies, then his children can put whoever they want in there. And I think that's pretty true at Valley Spring. If your family owns that plot, it doesn't have to be a bar relative that gets in that bar. I'm pretty sure that that's true. So all of those things, but again, the big caveat of most of these places is be careful that the record that you're looking at is a real person, it's your person. So online resources, I put FamilySearch.org, my favorite, but they have a page called Wiki, Family Search Wiki. So for instance, my tax laws that I'm really interested in following, my people that were in Virginia, how do I find those records? I go to Wiki and it tells me where those are, and sometimes there's an online. It gives you, for instance, information about every census and how they changed. Each census asked a little bit different, not always, but from 1790 to 1840, they were asking for head of household, and that could be a woman. If somebody was widowed, she could be the head of household. 1850, they began asking for names of the family. So those changed every 10 years. They would ask a little bit different information. I actually watched a webinar today of a guy who did a study with using just censuses, and his title was something to the degree of solving 1770 problems using the 1880 census. And it was fascinating how he did the study. He broke each part of it down to look at how old the person was when, who was the main person on the census, and then looking at his parents, and they give that information, where they were born, what state. And it was very fascinating. His name was Warren Bittner, if you want to go on Legacy, and I have that address in my syllabus. MyHeritage.com is another good, and some of these have a little bit different records. Ancestry, and I don't know exactly the years ago, maybe 5 years ago, but Ancestry linked themselves to Family Search, they linked themselves to Find a Grave, and they linked themselves to newspapers.com. If you don't have a subscription with newspapers.com, you can get very limited information, but some of that is on Ancestry. And those are just to name a few of the online sources. There are many, many, many resources for doing record search. I also look at the GeneaNet community stuff that'll come up in your hints. I'm cautious of all of those. I'm very skeptical about anything because those are full of mistakes too, that I could prove that are mistakes. But libraries, state historical societies, and state archives keep records that some of these other places don't have. Because remember, I told you Family Search went out to record, like civil record courts. They went to churches, but they didn't always go to state archives. So when tax records were taken, for instance, a copy would be kept here in a county, and then another copy was sent to the state. So a lot of times they have, if you have what they call a burned county, and that would be a county where, and it doesn't have to be even related to the Civil War, but wooden courthouses burned, and so every document that was in them sometimes burned to the ground with them, and that's a burned county. And there are ways to get around finding those records because somebody may have a copy of them, and so the state archives is a good place to look. The State Historical Society, Bob and I watch a man there who, his name is Bill Edelman, who gives free genealogical classes online through the State Historical Society, and I have that in here with his name. Start from the beginning and watch those because he talks about taxes, he talks about land, different things that you wouldn't normally, if you don't have anything to do in the afternoon, watch one of those. They're very informative. You will learn a lot. Libraries like Mid-Continent Library and Independence, they have things like publications. Maybe somebody did a study of the waterways in Henry County, Virginia, and then the people who lived on, one of my families lived on the fishing fork of the Leatherneck Creek in Henry County, and there has been a book. In fact, I had an author send me his book that I couldn't find anywhere else. So those things are sometimes kept in these genealogical libraries. Churches and cemeteries, I've talked to you about the Find a Grave, but churches, and I don't think that they necessarily want you to come and knock on their door to go through their records. The church records from here in St. Genevieve are on this list at Family Search. You can find those. But there are some places that you could go, and the Archdiocese of St. Louis, who oversaw all of the churches in this part of Missouri, their library is available. You can go in and look through their records. I looked at Henry Pratt's records when I was there before, and they're very accommodating for you to go. Just know that everything isn't online, and if it isn't, you need to find it and find out how to find it. That's where the wiki, Family Search Wiki comes in. It's real helpful. And then, again, developing this habit from the very get-go. When you pull a record from anywhere, title it, and if you can, what I do on Family Search is I find always their microfilms are within a file, a microfilm number that has a film number. I copy that and I put it in the title of whatever it is I find. And one of the reasons that I do that, I learned the hard way of doing that, is that in deed records, I didn't get the second page when I was into it, and so you have to go back. And if you go back and you have to plow through all of that information again, it's a lot easier to just look at how you titled it with that address. And you can also put the web address, if you don't want to do that. When you pull it up in your tree and make a copy of it, you can put that in the little documentation for that picture. Publications, if you go to the library and you take a picture, for instance, if you go up to the library and you're looking at the Project Pioneer books, you need to get the front covers of those that have the information when they were published, the publishing, if it's a book, the publishing house, the IBN number, because you may want to get that whole book at some point. And so if you have that information, you don't have to go looking for it. If you want to write about your family, you want to publish a book, for instance, and I have my little book that you were looking at. I don't have a lot of things in there that I needed to source because some of it is not research that I did. But those things are always better if you can provide a source. It makes your tree credible, and I think you should strive for that. I know a lot of people are willing to just copy and paste from a tree on Ancestry and they're done, but it may not be your family, and if that's your approach to doing genealogy, you're missing a lot of information. Newspapers, there's another thing I see on Ancestry a lot where people will just simply crop the obituary and they don't include which paper it was, they don't include the date. It may say the date because of the person's burial date or whatever, but when you crop images from anywhere, make sure you crop, or if you crop it in Ancestry, it will give you the citation and the source, and it'll put it in there if you save it the right way. So those are just things I've learned from mistakes where I didn't do it and then I find something and I go, where did I find that? Sometimes you don't go back. It's really hard to go back. So I'm going to give you a few examples because I know we're getting a little bit late here, but this is a copy. If you've never seen a deed, this is called an indenture. These types of records are in every courthouse, in every state, in every city, and they have boilerplate language, which I don't know if the guy who wrote them had a template that he used for, or if he just knew from memory of what to say. But they always state an indenture means some type of sale, and it can also be for rental, I've found, but it'll tell you the date that it was done, the date that these two parties came together and completed the sale. It'll tell you party of the first part and that person where he's from. So this deed is actually my family, and it was in Pittsylvania County, Virginia, and he sold land to William Williams of Charlotte. So there's a clue. Who's William Williams? You got to find out. And then it will tell you how much he paid for the land. It'll tell you where the parcel of land is located. As you read through it, you'll see the components that would be written down by a surveyor. So when this land was sold by Abraham to William, that guy didn't go out and resurvey this unless he added or took away from the original land. So you can go back in the records and you can find where Abraham bought this land, and it should have the same components of the language for selling that land. And then I look from this and I can see Abraham didn't know how to write his name, so he was probably illiterate, which is not unusual for 1802. And then you look at the witnesses, and you also look at the neighbors, because a lot of times the neighbors are relatives, or in this case, the Devon that's up in the top of this is the man who sold him the land, but he also still had land next to him, so he was a neighbor. And that's something when you hit brick walls, which believe me, you will hit them, that you look at what the experts say. Look at fan. and that's friends, acquaintances, and neighbors. So if you go through the census and you see who's living next to your ancestor, you can go in and research out to see who those people are, and if they're your neighbor and they all moved on, that, you know, that may be a hint that they all were in Charlotte County and then they moved to Henry County or whatever. So those are all clues. The little bottom paragraph then is the date that it was actually recorded in the court office. Sometimes those can be a year apart. So there may be another, if you don't see that in your original land sale, then you keep looking because there's more to that. And that's the thing that you have to learn about. This is where I got trapped with only doing the first page because I didn't read it. And so very egregious error, but I do it all the time now. And then the experts always say to you, when you get a record like that land deed, read it, analyze it as you read it. And if you're in the courthouse, that's definitely when you read it and analyze it. But then when you get home and you've got a little time, transcribe it. Why? Because then you get in your mind the information that's in there. And then if you're looking at, like, that's how I knew Devin was the neighbor in this one, because I had the first one that I had read and transcribed. It's a real pain, and you don't have to do it. I mean, all of this is up to you. It's arbitrary whether you do it or not, but it will make your life a little easier. Here is an example of a class that I just recently took by Gail Jackson, and she has, on the left is a document that she pulled, and you can see it's really hard to read. There's no way if you had that in your file and then you wanted to compare 2 years later in the taxes, look at the chore you'd have to go through. So if she transcribes it and she has the names broken down like this, it's very easy for you to go back and say, well, I have a William Pitts and I know he's related to these guys, but he's not there. So from that you can maybe determine he wasn't old enough to pay taxes, and now he was, that, you know, now you have the record where he did. So it's always, whenever you look at transcribing, it's how it can help you later. And then you can also abstract, which I don't like abstract because they pull out all of that boilerplate. But anytime a human being or even AI transcribes, there's a chance for a mistake. So this is something, and we'll talk a little bit about this with DNA. I have DNA shared matches, and I'm interested in how they're related to me. So how you do that is you research their tree. You find that out. You try to find that out. So this is a guy, Carmel Cole, that I know his ancestor, his descendant, is one of my shared matches. So I was looking for information, and I found him in this 1950 census transcription, which was in Ancestry, and so that means it was probably done by AI. It's not done by a human, it's by artificial intelligence. And I was looking at it, and I read through, okay, yeah, this is what I know about him. He was in St. Louis, I know that. Wait, who's this Catherine Cole? So at the bottom, there is a person named Kathleen Cole, who's 58 years old. This doesn't match any records that I have about this man, and I've gone through and I have a lot of information. So the next thing I do, and one thing about these transcribed letters, or transcribed censuses or whatever they are, a lot of times another person who's in it will have a blue link where you can click on their page and it'll give you their information. So I clicked on Kathleen, and once again it says she's his daughter, but she's born in 1892. And I said, that just can't be right. What's the deal here? And I read through, and I couldn't answer it except to go to the original. So when you go to the original records, this is a portion of a 1950 census that was done. I always look at the enumeration date because, and that's what's up at the top where my arrow is. It was taken in, it begins in April. I don't know that her specific information was on that day, but that's when they began this 1950 enumeration. And I again look at all of the information, and I can see now the original writing by the enumerator. And when I get to Kathleen, the daughter, that doesn't look like 1892 to me. So I blew it up and I looked, and lo and behold, Kathleen was born in February in the year 1950. So she is indeed the daughter, and she's only about 6 months old. So depending on when they actually did the census. So that is kind of a little nitpicky thing, but it's not if it's your family that you're looking for, because you may be off on a rabbit hole looking for Kathleen, who was born in 1892 or whatever the date was, and you're not going to find it. So that's one of the reasons that AI has to be verified. You need to keep your brain engaged when you're looking at things that have been transcribed by AI. So here are some valuable tips from experts. Don't just be a collector of documents like I was in the beginning 30 years ago. I have amassed all of these papers. Some of them I never looked at again. And who knows what I might find that I've been looking for all these years. Read every word of the document. Now you can fast read, speed read when you're looking at it in the beginning, but eventually sit down with it in a short time too, because you'll forget. And read it and analyze it. What does it say? Who does it name? Who are the people? What's going on here? If Williams was from Charlotte County, why was he there? Why did he sell, and did he sell land? There's a clue. I got to go look for land in Charlotte to see if he sold a piece of land. I have no idea who this man is. I don't know how old he is. I believe he's my 5 times great-grandfather's brother, though, from all the other research that I've done. So note every name. If you don't know who they are, start working on who they are to figure them out, because you shouldn't go further until you know. And you may never find out. It might just be some friend. It might be somebody that was at the courthouse that day and they asked them to sign the witness for his deed. It doesn't mean there's anything pertinent in it, but you have to see if there is. And again, check for friends, acquaintances, and neighbors. And when you transcribe the record, you can abstract it to just remove out the language of who, when, what, and where. You don't need to put the boilerplate stuff. And if you do that, just check for yourself for errors, because we all make mistakes. And anytime you have the option to use an original record versus a transcription, and a lot of times if you look for like that 1950 census, it gave me that transcription first, and then I had to go look for, which is attached to that file. But they want you to use that, but it wasn't right. So that's why I don't use them if I have the chance not to. Other valuable tips, and I can't stress enough, do not copy other people's work unless they have, and I'll tell you right now, I do it. I go into trees, and if they have a record that I don't have, that I can say that is a real record and it's a good record, I'll take it, because that's what you do, and you know you can verify what you took. If they don't show a source and all they have is what somebody else has written, and you can tell that pretty much by looking at the page itself. If it's not a reliable record, like it's a cropped image of the newspaper, that doesn't mean I'm not going to try to take that, but it means I'm going to find the original. I'm going to go out of my way to find it before I move too much further. And you just do the most credible research that you can, and it will not, it'll serve you well, especially 30 years later, whenever you say, oh wow, I wish I had done that, because I do, I wish I had done some stuff. So we're going to move into DNA. We're almost done here. DNA, what's the big deal? Everybody talks about DNA. Do you have to do DNA to do research? Nope, you do not. And does it help you? It can. Will it give you all your answers if you submit a sample in and then you get the results and it'll outline all your relatives back to Moses? It won't. So you have to. But for me, I had my family question that where did my 9-day-old great-grandfather, where did he live and who carried his information forward? And this is something that people who are experts in genealogy will tell you, you have to do the research. You can do the DNA to supplement what you've done, but really to prove it, you have to do DNA research. You have to try to find somebody that you can test. And I did that. Whenever I came here, I asked a friend of mine if she knew somebody who was related to Williams here in town, and she gave me that name. And I just cold called him and said, you don't know me, and this is going to sound really strange, but can I get a spit sample from you to compare your DNA, Y DNA, with my brother's? Because Y DNA is male DNA. You all men have a Y chromosome, XY. You do not have, I don't have that. So for me to find my great-grandfather's people and carry that name back, I'm going to use Y chromosomes for that. And so I did that, and I got a hit. I wasn't totally sure at first that that guy was really my cousin, so I upgraded the test to more markers. Markers are just words for how many different ways that DNA is broken down, and you'll hear about centimorgans. That's just a term for how they describe DNA segments. And so as I moved farther up the scale, it took me 3 upgrades to really convince myself that he was indeed. But I had the research, I had it, but I just didn't believe what I had, partially because when I started it was a very new field. I don't know how much you all are aware of DNA, but in law enforcement, there was a crime back in 1985 out in San Francisco, and a man raped and killed a woman, and he apparently had some other crimes, violent crimes, but they could never break that case. So from 1985 until they had a sample, but in 1990, that was when DNA first started being used in law enforcement, and they held back because they knew that it was still in its infancy, and if they had used that sample at that time, they probably would have used it up, and once they've used it, it's gone. So they waited a while, and then in 2019, they still hadn't tracked, they put it into the CODA, the big computer the big computer law enforcement database, and couldn't find a match. So they hired a woman named C.C. Moore, who, and I don't recall the name of her company, but she's a genetic genealogist. They hired her. She took the DNA. She looked at this return that came back and said, here's who this guy's related to. We don't know his name, but he's related to all these people. And she went through every match, and she figured out who he was related to. And he was arrested in 2019, and he's the Golden State Killer. And he was shocked as he could be when they came knocking on his door. He thought he had gotten away, but he was a very old man. But that is kind of now the norm. They're using that in law enforcement all the time. It used to be that that sample that you could not use before it's time because you might use it all up, it doesn't matter anymore. They have, the technology is so advanced that now they can do touch DNA and get your DNA. So don't commit crimes. That's the lesson from it. What is it?
Public service.
Yeah, that's a public service announcement. So the other kinds of DNA, Y chromosome, and you say, well, what's the best to use? Well, it depends on your question. It depends on what you're trying to figure out. Mitochondrial DNA, I would like to know who my 2 times great-grandmother is, because Mary Williams actually had a name that I can't prove. Her name was McGinty. And so I would like to do mitochondrial DNA, but she had 1 son and no other children to my knowledge. So I don't know if I can track that. I'm investigating that. So that would be if you were looking for maternal, and on your dad's side either way. Autosomal is the most common DNA that they take now, and it's what all the companies offer you. You can get it for $39. That was just on sale like a day ago, and now Ancestry is back up to $99. But we all receive 22 chromosomes from our parents, half from our dad, half from our mom. And whenever there's recombination, if you were a great science student, which I was not very good, but when an egg is fertilized, then it's like your body automatically, with a deck of cards as an example, will give you, well, here, this is your mom, this is your dad, this, and I don't know, and there's no rhyme or reason to that, which is why you can have a brother. My brother has DNA through Ancestry. He has matches that are not matched to me. Does that mean I'm not related to them? It does not. It means that they got a better portion of the DNA from our mom and dad, or from his portion of our mom and dad. And how do you figure that out? You do the genealogy. You go in, and I build their trees. I start from the limited information, or if they have a big tree, and I go in and I just make a loose, I don't try to look for any kind of, I don't do documents for those, because I'm looking at what they have. I'm not looking whether it's right or not. And so that's, if you whatever you want to do DNA for, make sure you target for what you're looking for the answer. And then I've done Y-DNA with my brother, and I've done autosomal. So I could do the mitochondrial, and you benefit from that. So the companies that offer these tests, Ancestry is the largest pool of DNA testers. So if you want to tap into the largest pool, you take from Ancestry. But MyHeritage.com has kind of a different pool. I think I read where Ancestry has 8 million people who have taken their test. 23andMe had a little problem back with somebody hacking their site a couple of years ago, and I'm not sure they're back from it. Family Tree DNA is the only company that you can get Y-DNA tested. It's the only one. So Living DNA is another company. I'm not terribly familiar with it, but I can tell you that if you want to enlarge your pool of who you can find that you're related to, test with Ancestry, because if you don't test with them, you can't upload another company's test into their tree, into their program. But if you test with Ancestry, you can upload it into all of these other databases for free. So you enlarge your pool then of who you can test. And MyHeritage actually has a better like shared match. They will show you how you're related to shared matches, and Ancestry just started that with their Pro Tools. It's $10 a month, and I hated to have to pay it because I already pay their pricey membership fee, but it's worth every dime of it. So which is best in testing and in companies? You've got to figure that out by what you're looking for, and maybe you'll do all, but the best way to do all is to do it the way I told you with Ancestry. So then there are all kinds of online sources. If you want to learn more, Your DNA Guide is somebody I've been following for a couple of years. She does a lot of free seminars. She does some paid ones. The person's name is Diane Southard, and she worked for the Sorensen Group for 25 years in DNA, molecular genealogy. And she's very knowledgeable, and she will help you try to figure out who you're related to and your shared matches. She's really good. DNA Painter is a company. It's actually, the guy's name is Johnny Pearl, and he has a lot of free tools that you can use. So if you have your shared matches and you have, for instance, my brother shares 2,775 centimorgans with me, which is exactly what I would expect. But some of the people who share with him and share those people that I share with him, sometimes their centimorgans are not what they should be. So they might be half cousins, they're not half siblings, because I know my siblings, but so this DNA Painter has a shared matches tool. They also have one called Watto, which is What Are the Odds? And that was developed by a man named Blaine Bettiger. On Facebook, he has a genetic genealogy tips and techniques group that you can join, and people are on there all the time asking about their Watto results and stuff. So the deeper you get into it, there's an awful lot of information that you can tap into for free. YouTube has free tutorials. There's a woman called, I believe it's called Genealogy TV, Connie, somebody, she's really good. And then if you want to learn more about DNA kits and what they offer, each of the companies that offer them have information. You can get a lot of information on each one of them. So the big takeaway from that is don't stop learning. Don't think you know, oh, I know enough about that, and just keep moving, because it might help you to know that information. It will definitely help you to know whether you should test DNA. DNA tests for Ancestry range about $99. You can find all of them do sales, but the Y-DNA is pricier. It's a couple $100. They have what is called a big Y, which is, when I started out, my match and I, the guy that I bought 2 kits. The first one I did 37 markers. I don't think they even offer that anymore. And then I upgraded it to 67. Then I upgraded it to 111. The 111 is definitely the one to do. But now they have this big Y, and it's 800 markers. And they believe by that they'll be able to, and not right now so much, I haven't benefited from that as much as I had hoped to, but in the future, when DNA is more advanced, and they may be able to take that Y-DNA back 12 generations instead of my 4 and 5 times great-grandparents. So it might not impact me while I'm alive, but if my daughter carries this on, so they're always advancing and doing things. So don't stop learning. Go in and look at everything. I want to talk briefly about AI, which I already have a little bit. It's still in its infancy, but you see it more and more. You try to pay your Spectrum bill, and you see on the bottom right hand, there's a little screen that comes up, and do you have any questions? And that's an AI. They can answer questions that are pretty basic. If you get in and yell at them about something that's different, they're going to switch you over to a customer service person. ChatGPT, if you're on Facebook and you get a fact checker or you get feedback, sometimes the people that answer posts on Facebook are AI. They're not real people, especially if you look at any of the political stuff. It's garbage. Anyway, so that's what they're using AI for. The NLP is natural language processing. This is a thing that genealogists should look at and love, because if you've ever looked at a newspaper transcription, and I meant to tell you about the newspapers that you think, well, there weren't newspapers back in the 1700s. Yes, there were. The Library of Congress has a page called Chronicling America. The Fair Play from here in town is on their microfilms. It's digitized, you can look at it. But if you ever look at how they transcribe, any source transcribes a newspaper, in the early days, they couldn't distinguish between like the E's and the O's and those letters that are all similar on the typewriter. Now they have advanced it so much that it can read script. Wow, and I just got an email from the guy who runs the Legacy webinars, and he broke a long time brick wall with a German family because the AI transcribed it for him and identified for him. So we're in that age where we're looking up and the planes are going by and we're going, wow, it's amazing. One thing I don't like about AI is if you are in, anybody have Ancestry and have a tree in it and have DNA? Do you have DNA? Do you ever look at through lines? Be very careful about through lines because those are based on people's trees. So if the tree information is wrong, it might still connect you that because it's not good. The DNA isn't wrong. You're still connected to them. But anything they have in that tree, they pull it forward into through lines. And I don't like that because, it forces you to be a better genealogist, I guess. That's the bottom line for it. But I have 3 men named Abraham Williams, and they're all a conglomeration of one person. And so I can't get any anything out of that information. I do look at the different people, and I gave you the blog address for that. It's in your syllabus that you can read about AI because I think it's the future. I think we're never going back to what we did before. So are we overwhelmed? A little overwhelmed? Don't be, because there are all kinds of places to find information. Ask questions. Don't be afraid to go in. And if you take these classes, most of the people giving these classes are very open to answering them. Sometimes they'll help you do a little bit of your research if it's DNA related. Diana Southard does that all the time. She has free webinars. You can find her and I tap into those, and sometimes I watch them over and over again because some of the stuff has anybody ever heard of the Leeds method of dotting your matches? Well, the Leeds method was done on paper by the lady, I don't recall her first name, but her last name was Leeds, and she basically went into information that she had, and everybody that was related to Williams she would put in blue, and then everybody that was related to the next group of people was in red. And so then she would look at those and see how the patterns, well, that's all done on computer now for you. And so that's what through lines is. But you can then follow those. But she shows you how to dot your matches, and then you can get, if you're looking for, like me, Mary McGinty, where I have no records, I'm hoping that by using her method, I'll be able to find people who are related to Mary McGinty's mother. And so I'll go back a generation into the third generation of great-grandparents to look. So that's my presentation. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to entertain any of them if I can help you. But don't be afraid of it. It's fun.
So those true lines, they're related, but they're not?
No, I didn't say that. They're related because they're related. They're connected. They're linked with DNA. So they are related, but how they say they're related may not be true. And so you have to look, because like in my case, one of the people that's Abraham Williams is actually a cousin, but they have them all of their information. So you have to split that apart. You have to do the genealogy. But no, you should take it, look at it, do the genealogy and figure out if it's right. A lot of them, probably are right. I'm not saying that that's not. I just don't like the fact that they don't have any way to distinguish whenever there's something like that, where you have a case of, and you might find, I don't know how many, Bob probably has this happen more than I do, except for the Williams, where you have 6 men in an area in the same county that might have the same name, and you have to find out which one of those people is whatever your grandfather's name was, or your great-grandfather.
And Sinclair is notorious for the Francois and the Jamies.
Exactly.
The Germans, they all started out with the name Franz.
Right. And if
the more you do, the more you learn the truth.
Exactly. That's exactly true. And if you think about like the census records, and remember I told you not to get hung up on spelling, if you think about the enumerator that probably came down from St. Louis to do the records down here to take census, he went to the door and knock, 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 and it was Francois Labière. Well, how do you spell that? I don't know. I don't write my name. I don't know how to read and write. And so he wrote it the way he heard it. And so it may not be the way your family wrote their name. My Degonier, oh my gosh, the number of ways that that's written is incredible. So never turn your brain off when you're doing this stuff. Another thing that I don't know if you know much about DNA, Bob, but there is something called endogamy. Have you heard of endogamy? We are an endogamous community here. I grew up in Jefferson County. That's an endogamous community. And what that means is like, and a lot of times genealogists, like the experts, will talk about the Jewish communities where they intermarried because they didn't go outside of their faith. But down here, we have the French who did it. Over there, we have the Germans who did it, all over. And how you can tell that is when you start finding matches who are really your fourth cousin, but they have the same numbers that your brother has. Something's wrong, and that's usually your key. And it can be multiple relationships. It doesn't always have to be endogamy, but a lot of times it is. So see, there's so much you can learn. You have to learn those things. So
a good example of that is that you have a lecture on the German class at Valley. I asked the teacher who the kids were. So she gave me 20 names, and I looked at I had a huge German database of something. They were all related to each other, and they were all related to me. Some of them were seventh cousins.
yeah.
But it's amazing.
Right.
That's happened to me a couple of times.
Well, in my family, and I'm going to shock you and not say Williams, my mother's mother was born in Ozora, and her name was Stella Barr, and her mother was a Beezer. The Beezers and the Bars, married here, married there. They're all, I mean, you can go back. One of the neat things about that, though, is when I look at the Beezers that are in my family tree, and sometimes DNA can tell us medical things. And a lot of the people in the right at the turn of the century of my Beezer and Bar family died from consumption, which is also known as tuberculosis. And so you can see, but that's not something that's genetic, that was more cultural. But so there's that kind of stuff. But you try to, every bar named their kids Joseph, John, Martin. In fact, Martin Barr and his picture, his window is at the Catholic Church, the patriarch, he named one son Joseph Martin, and he named one son Martin Joseph. He liked that name so much. And I know who they are. In fact, Joseph Martin was my 2 times great-grandfather. So, but just keep moving. And if you have questions, sometimes if you have a brick wall, putting it aside, but then find strategies for how you can break those brick walls. And for me, it was the DNA. I had the records, but I couldn't trust what I had, and I didn't have very much. I still have one record for John and Mary Williams, and it's from 1894. My great-grandfather was born in 1878, and so he was 21, do math, whenever they signed the only record that I have. So they weren't dead, but I don't know why.
Do you have any suggestions on how to organize boxes and boxes and boxes of photographs?
Of photographs? Well, I didn't even talk very much about photographs. I mean, I think if you can organize them, I don't know how many you're talking about. My mother and my grandmother both had drawers where they threw pictures, and the aunts would send pictures of the kids when they were in grade school. A lot of them don't have names on them. I think if you can go through and put them by eras, maybe. So you have the kids from 1950, and then you have the 1900s. So each generation, maybe. I don't know, because I haven't done it myself, and I need to. But all of my people are gone, so I couldn't find out now if I wanted to who somebody is. My grandma did write on a lot of them, and it's a lesson for you to write on the ones you've taken, because otherwise nobody knows. And people.
Nobody has photographs anymore. It's all
Right, it's all digital. I know. And what do you do with that? Well, you can upload those things to your family tree, and then you can put on there, it is written on the back, or you can take a shot of the back and put it with that. That's what I do. I always go for original documents, so that's an original document. And if you can put that, then you can prove, if one of your relatives comes and says, that's not who that is, well, here was on the back, and it looks like Grandma's writing, Grandma did that. So I just try to keep my genealogy pure, and if I can use records, original records. If I can't, I do. You have to work. I saw somebody complaining on one of the genealogical sites that I follow on Facebook, and she was just mad, just so angry because there weren't any records from the 1810 whatever. And somebody wrote back very just very succinctly, we have to work with what we have, you know. And if you want me to make it up and that makes you happier, but you know, you have to work. But then the thing is if you think that being online and going through these sites that there are is all of the records, you're very wrong about that, because there are ways to look and places to look, and you know, you just have to be smart and dig around until you find them. And it's a lifelong, I mean, I don't think I ever said I would do my genealogy in a couple of years, but it's taken me all of these years, and I still don't have the answers about my great-grandfather. So, you know, but it's fun. I enjoy it a lot.
Should you warn people that it's addictive?
Oh yeah, I think I said that in between what I said. It's very addictive, you know, especially whenever, and now the person who's the total difference in that, the odd man out, is Ed. I did his whole family genealogy as far back as I could in Germany, and he's just like, meh. And in fact, I think that he said to me, "You're dead." So I remember that. So I mean, some people aren't interested in it, but and our daughter is very interested. She just doesn't have the time to be interested. But I'm hoping that I'm putting this down, that someday when she's older and can take the time, that she can complete it. Because by then, who knows what'll be out there? You know, maybe all of the records will be online where they're not now. So.
Which do you prefer to keep your records in, the brackets or page forms of numeral 1 and then A and then B?
I use an online tree, and I don't use brackets and any of that. I just put them on like the one I showed you. That's how I start my tree. Hold on, I'll show you that page again. So at the beginning. This is how I keep my tree. It's exactly, I start myself and then I add to it, because I can add records to it. In the beginning I kept paper records, but I don't know, you know, was it a couple of weeks ago when Microsoft went down and everybody's computer was off? Boy, that day I thought, I wish I had kept my paper records up, because that might be our future. We don't know that. So I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things you have to make the decision for yourself. But that's what I use. I use Ancestry mostly. But I do have a tree in MyHeritage, because I have DNA there, and they will often, and if you don't have that, they can't link to you. They don't know who, you know, they know if your name's there, and they know your DNA is there and it matches this DNA, but they don't have a family tree. So it's good to be able to look and see if you can figure out how people are related to you.
Did you ever see original birth certificates that said first-born child, second-born child?
No. And
some in my family have that deal.
Were they generated by the state or by church?
That was a state certificate.
How far back?
And one came through, one passed away in there, and ended up, they were the second grown child, but the birth certificate said they were the third.
Now, was it a
child.
birth certificate or was it a birth record for like a baptismal record?
No, it was from the state.
Because this is something I failed to mention when we were talking about Missouri State, and I gave you a link for the sos.gov site, which is the Secretary of State of Missouri's site, and they have free death certificates, but they start at 1910 and they go, I think the last year that they are up to is 1973, so they don't come all the way up where we are. But back in the day when I first started this, I sent off $15 a pop. You write out the little sheet, you put your money, you know, write a check, write a self-addressed stamped envelope, and then you wait 6 to 8 weeks, and now they're at your fingertips. They're free. You can download them, you can print them out. And so I gave you that. A lot of the Digital Heritage, Missouri Digital Heritage, they have a lot of really good records in there. They have Civil War. They have, it's called Missouri Digital Heritage, and it's sos.gov.
Yeah, would you get them the original certificate or a copy of?
You get the original. It's a digitized original. So when you download it, it's if you needed a copy for something official, it won't work. You have to send off and get one that has a seal, but it's a copy of it. Yeah, it's a copy of the original. I've never looked a lot in birth records, but they don't have them going back real far. And I don't know because I've never gotten them, but you know, probably, I don't know. Do you know, Bob, when they start
Well,
with
there was a period in the 1880s, I think 1883 to 93 here in St. Genevieve.
In St. Genevieve.
And I think in other places of the state, but like you said, they didn't have to start doing vital
Yeah,
records.
they're not standard until
And those
1910.
aren't online.
Yeah.
Just the,
But no, I have not seen that. But you know, if you can get baptismal records in German records in Germany for your family, and they look a little bit different. They're not like ours, but you know.
The form had changed from my older siblings.
Yeah.
The form they used.
That sounds like the government where they change it so they can charge you a couple of dollars more. That sounds.
I was pleased when you brought Williams up because it was your roadblock for a long time.
It was a brick
All
wall.
had roadblocks.
It was a brick wall.
And you work on it and drive you nuts, and put it aside for a while, and make it go come back. There are always new stuff being discovered.
Right.
It took me 10 years to find my third great grandfather when he came to America.
Yeah.
And some guy in Cincinnati said he's buried there.
Wow.
This is his son, so I have a whole line. But 10 years after I started.
I mean, that's probably the best advice to give is to never give up. Just keep looking, put it aside. Like you say, I got sick of it for a long time. And then I guess whenever the DNA started getting popular, I thought about that and thought, well, you know what, that makes sense that I could probably find my answers. And, you know, you have to be willing to spend the money. And I am at this point in my life. I think that it's worthwhile. I found what I needed. It wasn't that expensive, but, you know, is that worth it to you to break that brick wall? Because it was for me. The problem is you usually have one in every line, you know, that's something you can't. And the farther back you go, the less records you're going to find. You're going to have to use other creative ways to find those records. But that's why I say not everything's online, because sometimes the things that you'll need for those, I did a seminar, I listened to a seminar on legacy. Again, I cannot recommend that more to you, but there was a guy who looked at land plots to find where his ancestor was living based on how the tax records were written, so he could map out, and he was able to break a brick wall that way. So it isn't just records that we're commonly aware of. There are other things out there. You just have to be creative and research it. I was just looking today that it's highly recommended that you belong to the National Genealogical Society, because they have wonderful quarterly reports and stuff. I thought it was too pricey for me to do at this point. I still have enough work I can do on my own, but I wonder if the library would ever tap into that. I think it's like, for an individual, it's $85 a year, but you know, that's the chore for that would be for me to have to read those things, and I don't always have a lot of time to do that with the other things that I do. But
One more on this, nobody's surprised that sometimes you get a surprise while you're researching.
oh yeah, oh yeah.
Your family may not have been the most respected.
Exactly. You find that guy that they wanted to hang and he got away. Another caveat about DNA that you may not have thought of, and I see this all the time because of this one site that I watch, this Your DNA Guide. Sometimes people say, I sent my DNA in and I found out my biological father wasn't my father. And that's a big shock. And so you have to be prepared. If you send off for DNA, what's it going to show? You know, it might show maybe your grandfather or, you know, something, I don't know. Or maybe it was the neighbor that was your, you know, and surely it's not really laughable, because I read people that have that happen.
Is that why you want to know the neighbors? And what the family?
Well, in that case, you definitely do.
That show on Channel 9, was it Sammy Hagar? That's really not what it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then there was another lady on there that found out that the neighbor around the corner was actually her dad. And the guy that raised her.
Well, yeah, so you have to be prepared that maybe you'll be surprised, and how will you deal with that? Because this one person that found out her father was not her biological father, she was devastated by it, and I think that we all would be. But what the advice that the people that run this webinar that I watched said, you weren't there. It doesn't have anything to do with you except that you're a descendant. You don't know what the situation was, so don't judge it.
Like when you see on the tombstone, ran for sheriff so-and-so years, ran from the sheriff the next day.
Yeah. Well, I told you, don't ever rely on the Gospel of Grandma, and don't rely on tombstones, and don't rely on what's in a record like a death record, because the people that give that information, the informants, they may think they know, but this is another reason I tell you when you go interview your relatives, if you're lucky to have them alive, is that you write it down or you record it, because your memory will muddle. And I know my mother told me some stories, and I kind of half remember everything she told me, and and those are the ones I've researched out. But we all lose the details of that as time goes on, and years go by, and you think, gee, I wish I'd written that down. And the fact that you can pull that iPhone out right now and you can record really without them knowing too much, because I know that myself, I wanted to record one of my relatives, and they were just opposed to that. I don't want that. When it's a real nebulous thing, it doesn't mean that much to do it. It's just that I can keep that. But I also take a pad of paper and I write down what they say. But I've done all kinds of stuff where my family I know was buried out, like in Grubville, and I've contacted people that I know that live near there and say, I think you're related to me. And I go to their house with a scanner and they pull out pictures, and I've gotten pictures of my ancestors by doing that, just to be bold. Most people want to talk about their family. They want to talk about their history. And
one other on that, if the father of the family, the husband died, and there was a number of children, the mother had problems in financial end, often would marry soon.
Right.
And then you get, you're my children, your children, and our children. Right. And you get into some of those came in my family, and it's difficult to find through. My dad was around yet, but I did some of that.
Yeah. The problem is, I don't know, my grandfather, before he died, I tried to sit down and ask him about my Williams people, and what's really sad about it is he refused. He goes, you're just trying to dig up dirt. And I said, I'm really not. I just want to try to find out who this family was. And as it's turned out, I have found out all the information he was trying to closet. I don't care. I don't care about any of that. I care about where they were, and he knew. He had to have known that my great-grandfather was not orphaned at age 9. He knew that, but he wouldn't admit it to me. Whatever. I'm like a super sleuth to find stuff like that out, because I knew he had to be hiding something, because he was so adamant not to talk to me about it. So I don't care. That's not why I'm doing it.
We run into a lot of families in insurance anyway, and I'm sure you've run into this, where the families have fallen out, and they start spelling their last name.
Exactly.
Because they don't connect with the rest.
That's exactly true. And you can usually trace that back to when it started happening, because if they were able to write their name, because a lot of times most of my people were pretty illiterate back from my grandfather earlier. They couldn't read or write, and so I don't know, but family squabbles are kind of interesting, and they can destroy families. It's just a shame that they don't try to get together. But you're right, that's exactly why sometimes the name gets changed, because they don't want to be associated with it.
Becky, I've been in the insurance business for 49 years. Not all the illiterates were back in 1800.
Oh, yeah. Well, we're returning to that right now. I know that for a fact, but yeah.
Another generation, nobody's going to be able to read those
Cursive. Well, that's why AI is going to do it for them. And they're fine with that, because they don't look at it and discern, well, that can't be true, because I'm looking at this and that's not what I looked at. And so, I don't know. I think we've dumbed our society down, but that's another topic. I was going to say, if people would like to have, Bob and I do genealogy classes out at the library often. We haven't for the last couple of years, because I haven't been able to walk, but now I've had my knee replacements. But we sometimes do those associated with the Civil War group, and I would be willing to do another one where one of the things we didn't have really time was to go into some of these programs and show you how to look for family search records and what to search for, and like the film number, how you document that. You don't have to go through the regular search for that. I can't show you that. I probably could pull it up, but so going into maybe a next level for beginners to help you start a tree, if you're interested, I would be willing to do that, and maybe I could get Bob to help.
I could talk specifically how to use St. Genevieve records, because that's most of my databases. St. Genevieve people, you always find new ways to do things now into the Kaskaskia records.
Right.
Fort de Chart, and Spanish records. Those things, a lot of it's available here, a lot of it's available online. Becky was the first one to show me how I could see, during COVID, I could see our court records, or courthouse records, because they're online.
Yeah.
FamilySearch.org. So I don't have to go to the courthouse.
Right.
I can sit at home at night.
That's why I see all the time on St. John Genealogy, people are saying, oh, I'm coming in town to do research. Where should I go? Stay at home and look on your computer because it's all there. No, it was not. That's one of those things that has come about over time, that it's an amazing bit of progress for us that you can have that at your fingertips, and who knows what's going to be coming up that's there. I think one of the reasons Family Search doesn't have everything is some things are copyrighted, or some things like the Catholic Church, they told them in the beginning, you can copy this, but you can't make it public, and which is what being online is, public. So I don't know if that will ever change.
Well, the
I don't know.
records that they had go to 1993, except for baptisms, which ended in 1923, I think, because of the personality theft things. They wouldn't do that.
Right.
But all those other records, going back to 1759,
Right.
are online.
Well, that's what, when I was looking down at the foundation office, at those records that you asked me to look through, and there are things that are from our states before we were ever a state, the history of different, I found all kinds of records of the people who lived here, and I'd like to go into those deeper. Those aren't online. Some of them are on Family Search, but not all of them. So, you just have to be real creative to ask, and I'd like to tap more into the state archives, because back when I first started online on the computer, they had a list of everything that they had. They've taken that off now. It's a different way to search, and I think it's a lot more confusing, and it isn't as easy to find that information. But, you just be tenacious and keep looking for it and ask. And they do have, I think it's, I don't remember the exact address, but you can write them and ask them to look for you.
They'll do it too.
But they won't do a global look. Like I asked them to look for McGinty in Missouri, and they said, no, we don't do that. We'll find if you have a specific name. And I have those, that's the thing about shared matches too, is my McGinty people. I've tracked this woman, and it's a family through my DNA. I have more than 16 DNA matches of people who are descended from McGinty. They have to be related to me, but I'm just not quite sure how. But they were in Ripley County, they were in New Madrid, they were in Penobscot and Caruthersville, and I know that's my family, but I cannot. That's why I'm thinking about the mtDNA, because I can't put my finger on it, but I know it's there. So don't give up.
When something like that, I had an exchange student from northern Germany, and said, hey, my ancestry said, and you come across that name? Oh yeah, they got a store down there.
You have to be careful though, because a long time ago, I guess it was when Henry Hoag was still alive. It was probably 2000 when I first met him. I don't know if you all know who Henry Hoag was, but I was at his house one day, and his wife Arlene heard us talking, and my mom was with me, and she went into the bedroom and came out, pulled a picture out and said, this is your great-grandmother. I grew up next to her. And I went, whoa. But we also had a mutual friend that was doing genealogy, and one of his relatives had gone over to the army and was going to marry a girl, and they got pregnant, and he came back here and left her, and we were able to track down who he was. And I don't think he appreciated it much, but you're the one that left her over there and would marry her. But then I had another friend who that person that we helped, that was his father that I had online, he went to the town where my Beezers were supposed to have been from, and he took pictures of the Beezer Boulevard, or that's not what it was called in German, but he took pictures in the cemetery of all the Beezers. They're not related to me, at least not in the generation that they should have been. That's such a common name, and the bars. And then if you ever go ago, one of my cousins went to Europe, and she went to all the places where our ancestors were from, and she was devastated to not find cemeteries because they turn those over every 50 years. They do not keep tombstones for back in the early 1800s.
There are no old cemeteries?
Right, no, they turn them over,
There
yeah.
are old ones, but there are no old tombstones.
Yeah, the tombstones, the cemeteries stay intact, but they, and I guess they figure they're all decomposed enough that they can put another casket in there. I don't know how that works. Yeah, well, yeah, in New Orleans.
The
So,
biggest place,
go ahead.
Where do you get this Y-DNA? Where would you go?
Y-DNA, if you're interested in learning about it, you can go, I gave you the sites, Your DNA Guide, it's on your sheet. And you can also go to the Family Tree DNA website, which is ftd.com, I believe it is, and you can read about it, and it'll tell you about the test and what benefits there are from it and the kind of matches that you might have. And I didn't talk about this, but in that Williams mix, I know that there were 3 men, and they're all muddled together as one, but I had the research that I did. My ancestors moved into Pulaski, Kentucky about 1812, but this other Abraham Williams stayed in Virginia. Now they have him married to my she was my 3-time, I don't know what, off the top of my head. But anyway, I saw this guy who was on, remember Roots Web? The chat message board that used to be on Ancestry, a lot of that's been scrubbed off, but I kept reading this guy named Jack Williams, and he was bragging about having spent so much money with this world-renowned genealogy company, and he had all the information about Abraham Williams. And so I sent him emails, and I kept courting him. He would never answer me back, and I just kept at it. I know I'm related. My person who was here in St. Genevieve doesn't show up on census because it was 1820 and 30. He was born in around 1810. But I know it's mine because my DNA matches him. So I finally got him to respond to me, and I said, I'm so interested in this professional genealogy stuff that you have. If I pay you, will you make a copy and send it to me? I'll pay you all the costs from it. So he didn't want to do that, but then he did, and he sent it to me, and I'm going through this huge binder that he sent me, page by page. This is fantasy. This isn't true. This isn't true. He had this big story about how, and this is a genealogy company, I don't know the name of it, I could tell you because I still have his records, but he had this big fantasy that my Abraham Williams worked as a young man for his grandfather, and I don't know if you know the Isle of Curlis in Virginia in the 1700s, 1765, but he worked for Lord Richard Randolph. And that when Randolph died, he gave 30,000 acres of land to my supposed great-grandfather, the grandfather who was Abraham Williams' grandfather. And I said to him, where does it say in there who Abraham's grandfather was? How do you connect those two people? You can't skip a generation and prove that. Oh, no, they did that. Well, I looked in the records. There was nothing there. So I was very kind to him, but I said, I hate to tell you this, but you got taken. That is not true. And I will do the genealogy and help you find the truth. And I did that. And so when we did that, I'm able to split apart what I already knew, that his Abraham married a woman in 1811, and they always had her connected to my ancestor who married in 1803. And how I know that is the courthouse here in town has the marriage contract between their son Harmon Williams, who names them and where they're from. And I was able to show him that they're different people. And then on Find a Grave, there is just this, it makes me sick every time I think about this memorial someone has put on there with a picture of Abraham Williams 4 times, who was born, I don't know exactly, he would have been born about 1784, and he died in 1877. But this man who's very kind, and I did target testing. He finally agreed to do Y-DNA, to target test, and that's what you have to do. When you do research and you think somebody's related to you, you ask them and you pay for it, because if you want to know, they're not going to. Why would they pay for it? But I was able to target test with him, and I proved to him that this picture, which was taken in 1868 in Berea College in Madison County, Kentucky, apparently his family had this folklore like mine, the Gospel of Grandma, that they all were run out of Berea because they owned slaves. So I researched that out. It's partially true, but the man that he has this picture attributed to, which is his Abraham Williams, died in 1854, and this picture was taken in 1868. I didn't analyze that for him. I sent it to him, and he read it, and then about a week later, he sent me an email, and he said, that picture can't be my ancestor, right? And I said, oh, it is your ancestor, but it's not the man you say it is, and I can tell you who it is because I did that research. So, you don't do that to one-up him, but I just do it because there's information that you now have put out there all over the internet, which is not true. And that you won't believe, to go into Abraham Williams and look at the number of people who have copied that image, and it can't be him. I know who it is. It's his son's son, named Abraham Williams. And you can look at the picture, it's 1868, and by that time, Abraham, his ancestor, would have been near 80 years old. And this is a man who was 39 to 45 in his appearance. So, I mean, that's why I say make your research credible. Make sure that when you put something online, because if I find it and it's not credible, I'm going to write you and tell you that cannot be. So anyway, I won't keep you all any longer. Anybody else have a question?
Did you end up with 1,000 acres?
Oh, no. I didn't end up with an acre, and neither did he. And neither did he. I don't even know who the man was. And it can't be Robert. If his name was Robert, I actually then found Lord Randolph's will. He had 4 sons. So then I asked that question, why would he give Robert Williams 30,000 acres when he had 4 children, 4 sons? He had women too, and his daughters, they usually got land too because it would go to their husbands. It didn't necessarily go in their name. This would have been back in 1768 or something. So you have to, don't turn your brain off too when you look at these records. Does that make sense to you that maybe somebody has your ancestry? When your 3 times great-grandmother was born, but she had a child when she was 10. That could happen, but did it happen? Is that credible? I don't know. You guys have to decide that. So thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. And if we can do another...
Thanks. That's great information. I already passed out to you the brochure for next Wednesday, which is organisms that form everything in the world. This is some of the future coming up. We've got the loop going to be presented on September 18th, and that's Mike and Jody Uting, where they bought a boat up in Alton Pool, floated all the way down through Kentucky, come out in the Gulf of Mexico, went up the Atlantic coast, come back in through the Great Lakes, and floated it back to the Alton Pool. And it's a one-year story of their events. They're going to make a presentation. The presentation after that is stone hands. This is an individual that makes arrowheads, and he will actually set and chip arrowheads out. So he's got a great presentation.
What's his name?
I don't have his name. He says everybody calls him stone hands, so I get some DNA out there.
I got a friend they call Arrowhead Fred, obviously. It sounded like him.
Yeah. So then after that, we got David Fiddler. He wrote the book, The Enemy Among Us. It's about a prisoner of war camp out at Weingarten. He's actually going to have a book signing. He's going to bring his book in. He'll do a book signing and make a presentation on that.
And Bob,
Yes.
he wrote another book, that's fiction, The Enemy Among Us. I don't know. Anyway, it's about love stories, about what could have happened at that period. And that story is so interesting. I started it and did not put it down. I think I was up till 2 o'clock in the morning.
So he might be able to expand on that too.
Yeah,
Okay.
but having bring that up too.
So he's volunteered to come and do a speaker series. We're going to have a person come in on red tails. Anybody familiar with the red tails from World War II? So they were a group of pilots, and they did not let black people be pilots because they didn't think they were smart enough to operate an airplane. But towards the end of the war, they needed more pilots. They brought this group in called the Red Tails. They became such great pilots that they actually started having them train the other pilots. So his granddaughter, she lives over in Kansas City, is going to come in and make a presentation to us on the Red Tails. And then another item that's going to happen is If any of you have been downstairs to see the incubator from Jurassic Park 3, there's going to be one of those eggs hatch in September. So Carolyn knows about it, Bob knows about it. It's going to be a pretty big event, and the kids will get to come in. The egg's going to hatch, and the kids will get a chance to name the dinosaur that's coming out there. So all of this is coming up. Again, if you're not don't hold a membership on the way out, buy a membership, and all of this is free. You don't pay every time you come through the door. And you can take this evening's cost to come to this. Again, thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.